Across this country, many rivers see heavy fishing pressure, but like our national parks, a little effort can lead to a completely different experience. Today, we're heading into one of the most iconic rivers, the Gunnison, and we're going to uncover the best way to escape the crowds, immerse yourself in the wild canyon, and tap into some of the most amazing dry fly fishing this legendary water has to offer. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid, grew up around a little fly shop, and created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. Today, John Radle, general manager for Bauer and Winston, now is at Sims, has been a guide, has done quite a bit of things out there. He's going to talk about the Gunnison. We're going to go pretty deep into the Gunnison, this amazing river journey where you got to hike in miles. You got to hike your boat in, a mile down the canyon, and we talk about how good the fishing is here. So we're going to find out what this is all like, what sort of experience you need to get through the whitewater in this remote canyon. We're also going to find out where big trout lie in this river, how you can find them in the canyon by looking for splashes on the wall, what this stonefly hatch is all about, and also we're going to find out how to choose the right weight for a reel for your next adventure. We're going to talk about that, balancing the reel. It's something that I'm not sure we always think about, balancing the reel, and it's going to be a good one. Plus, we're going to hear the story of John Bauer, Bauer Reels founder, how he was a Porsche race car driver and how he uses some of the tech in those Porsches to create the Bauer Reel you use today. All right, finally, we've got a Gunnison podcast for you. Let's put it together. Here we go. Here he is, John Radle. How you doing, John?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on the podcast this morning.
Yeah. Thanks for setting some time here. We are going to jump into quite a bit today. I think the challenge is going to be to rein in the topics because you're in a pretty cool place in Montana. You know, the Big Hole, the Beaverhead, a bunch of famous waters. Plus, you are working for Sims now. You've been with Bauer, Winston, all that stuff. So we're going to talk reels and gear as well. But maybe take us back real quick. I always love to start out on the fly fishing piece just to see how you came into where you are today. Have you been doing this a while, or are you, you know what I mean? Or did you get started later in life?
Yeah, totally. No, I was pretty fortunate to get introduced to it earlier on. No one in my family really fly fishes, so that was kind of I had an interesting start to it. I grew up in Austin, Texas, so there's a little bit of a fly fishing scene there, but nothing. It wasn't super big when I was growing up back in like the early 2000s in Austin. So my first introduction to fly fishing was actually on a family road trip up to Colorado. Saw a couple guys fly fishing the San Miguel River in the southwest part of the state, and was like, that looks awesome. So pestered my dad for a while to get a trip, and he reluctantly got a half-day trip up for cutthroat trout, and we ended up just walking this real tiny cutty stream and throwing dry flies, and I had an absolute blast. Had a great guide that day, and that was really my introduction to fly fishing. After that, my grandpa used to work for 3M. And so that was back in the days when 3M owned Scientific Anglers. And so I got one of those like couple $100 super beginner SA kits. And so I had like a 5-6 weight SA rod with a plastic reel, and I beat the hell out of that thing, man. I fished so many panfish and bass, and really just kind of figured it out via trial and error and YouTube University. And that was kind of my intro, which super fortunate to get into it that way.
Right. And then eventually, when did that whole idea come to be where you thought like, wow, I could actually do this for a living?
Yeah, totally. I was pretty big into baseball growing up. And so a large portion of my life was consumed by that. And then I had an elbow injury that I suffered my like sophomore year of high school. And that was kind of really the point in which I was like, well, I don't have baseball to do all summer now. And so I kind of started being like, well, maybe I can fly fish, and maybe I can get out of this Texas heat. And so I started pestering some fly shops that I frequented while I was up in Colorado over the summer times, and ended up getting a position with one of them. And so I started working up at the Telluride Angler pretty early on over in Southwest Colorado. And so just started off in the shop for them and kind of doing stuff around the shop. Um, and then once the retail game started getting a little bit boring, I was always like, man, I really want to guide. And so got into guiding and then kind of worked half in the shop, half guiding for a few years, and then kind of eventually went full-time guiding for a year or two throughout my time in college. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to bounce between Telluride, Colorado in the summers working, and then Bozeman, Montana in the fall and spring going to school up here at Montana State.
Oh, Montana State. Okay. Right on. So, and then did the, is that a natural transition when it sounds like, you get into the fly shop, which is a great place to be. You get into the guiding eventually, and then you get into kind of I'm not sure what your role was there at Winston, but maybe talk about that. Is that like the next transition where you kind of jump out of the guiding into something else?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that was kind of a funny one. I had plans to go back down to Colorado and guide and kind of help out around the shop over at TO when I graduated. And then, as life does, I ended up staying up in Montana. And so I started looking for jobs up here and always been a fan of RO Winston, always been a fan of those fly rods. Didn't know a lot about Bauer actually getting into it, but drove over to Winston one day and handed my resume to Jeff Evans, who was the president of the company at the time, and somehow got an interview. And Jeff and I kind of hit it off, and they made me the offer to be, I guess my title was at Winston and Bauer was general manager of Bauer, but I mean titles are pretty fluffy there. It's really all hands on deck. It's a smaller company and a really good group of people that just kind of makes it happen in that building. And so I was fortunate enough to spend 2 years over there at Bauer Fly Reels, doing a little bit of a mixed bag of everything.
Right. And I think I just saw out there, at least, I mean, there's lots of cool awards. I think one of the saltwater reels from Bauer won an award, right? Were you into everything reels, like kind of all type saltwater fresh, or how'd that look as far as your role?
Yeah, yeah. So I was kind of involved in product development for all of the reels that we do. So that saltwater project was actually a large portion of kind of my time spent at Bauer. So yeah, we were super proud of the SLT and how well it's done so far. I think consumer feedback on that reel has been really good. And it won Best Salt Reel for Fly Fisherman Mag, which was a pretty awesome award to get presented for that project. And yeah, we're excited to see kind of how that project plays out over, several years. I don't think great saltwater reels are determined by how they do in the first year. It's how they do in the 20th year. But really excited for how that project turned out.
Yeah. Okay. And the it's interesting because the reels, I feel like the rods are. We've talked a lot about rods on this. We probably don't talk as much about reels because I think reels are, especially with trout fishing. I think you think, well, it's a reel, hold your line. What else does it need to
Yeah.
do? And right. And the saltwater is different, and in some of these bigger species, obviously having a drag is really important. But talk about that. I guess maybe talk about Bauer and Winston. First, Bauer, what are they most known for, do you think, in the fly fishing, space?
Yeah, totally. So it was started by a gentleman named John Bauer. He's from Washington, Oregon area. His professional career was racing Porsches. So I think that's kind of where Bauer's history is pretty unique, and the concept behind the fly reel is it's unique. It's a unique story for the fly reel space and fly fishing space. And so when he retired from racing, he loved building widgets, loved being part of the engineering and actual like performance aspect of the cars. Wasn't just a driver, right? And so he needed to kind of fill that void in his life, and he started manufacturing fly reels more as a hobby when he started. But just to kind of paint that background picture, a lot of the original clutch mechanism and drag mechanism for the Bauer fly reels of like the early 2000s was inspired by, brake systems on Porsches. And so you have this super unique clutch design that each part is manufactured specifically to do a job within that. And it's not just a one-way clutch bearing piece that was bought off the shelf, from Japan or from here in the US that gets slapped onto the reel that performs the function of that clutch. It's this really technical, very unique kind of design piece that really made a big splash in the fly fishing space when it was first introduced. And so you have reels like the M4 or the M series, most notably M4, which is a super popular fly reel from Bauer back in the day that people still covet and cherish, and kind of paints this really cool history and lineage of Bauer fly reels. And then the company was bought in 2016 by Winston Fly Rods. And so when the company was purchased, it was moved over to Twin Bridges. And I would say it kind of marked a transition point in the history of Bauer. Bauer had been around for a while, but I think it was kind of becoming a little bit of like a stagnant company in the fly fishing space. Just wasn't paid much attention to. It was a little more niche. And so after Winston had purchased it, kind of, that's when you saw a big aesthetic change in the way the fly reels looked, with the introduction of the RVR series, and really tried to bring that company and kind of put it back at the forefront of innovation, which it had been sitting in that throne for quite a few years, in direct competition with Able and other high-end fly reels. So kind of cool to be a part of that project and that mission over there in the Winston building. I think Bauer's still got a lot of potential, and a lot of awesome things down in the pipeline, but just as kind of far as the original fly reels getting from where they used to be to where they are now, that's a little bit of the story.
Yeah, that's cool. That is a really cool story. So Porsche, he was a racer.
Yes. So he drove for him. I think he won a Grand Prix in like 1988 or something like that. But
Oh wow, that's John Bauer.
yeah, that's John Bauer. That's the namesake of the company. He's a super
Wow,
interesting individual.
he's still around these days.
He is. He is. Yeah, I've gotten the pleasure of speaking to him on the phone a handful of times, and he's a great guy.
Right on. That is really cool. Okay, so we got a little bit of the Bauer story there, and so what is on the reels itself? So the drag. You talked a little bit about that. I think weight can be very important, right? Depending on what rod you're using. What else is? Why is the reel? What else does it function? Like how else would you separate it? Like a really high end good reel versus say a reel that doesn't have as many features or benefits?
Yeah, totally. I think if we're talking trout, it's a little bit more, nitty gritty, picking hairs.
Yeah, yeah.
But in the saltwater game, a lot of this stuff does, like kind of like you referenced earlier, David. It really comes into play. And details matter and performance matters. So a lot of what you think about when you're manufacturing a saltwater reel is gonna be kind of like broken down into, I would say, two main buckets. One bucket's going to be user interface. So like, how easy is this reel to hold? Like, is the knob comfortable while you're reeling in 200 yards backing? Is the arbor size large enough to pick up backing quickly, and store enough backing, on that fly reel for it to function well during the fight? Is the weight good? Does it sit on the fly rod in an appropriate manner and counterbalance that rod appropriately? And then does it look good, right? Like that's a big aspect to it as well. So there's kind of this like user interface. How do your hands function with the product? And then there is the actual internals and the fish stopping capabilities of that fly reel. And so with that comes a lot of reliability that we try to bake into it. Whether or not that reel is sealed or not, is a big deciding factor of a lot of things. There's T-bores out there in the world. Those are kind of more of an open cork drag system, and those are super reliable, right? So that's one avenue to take towards stopping a fish in a saltwater setting. We kind of chose with the SLT to go a sealed drag system, which poses, I would say, some more challenges in making that perform correctly, but really cool concept when you get it to work right. Having a reel that is practically maintenance free, that you can go use in the salt is pretty beneficial on big trips.
So with the saltwater reels or just reels in general, there sounds like there's kind of two types. There's either it's a seal drag or it's not a seal. I mean, there's other types, or it's not a seal drag. I mean, talk about that. Why would you guys? It seems like the seal drag would be the one that would make more sense since it's totally sealed, right? You don't have to worry about cleaning. Is that the difference? Or maybe explain that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so sealed drag just would refer to no water is really able to come into that system in a perfect world. The other, the challenge with that is if you build something to not let water in, it doesn't let water out very. So making sure that system stays dry and functions well in really wet environments is pretty important. Maybe a more classic style reel, like an open system. The beauty there is simplicity. Usually those systems are built to be taken apart and greased, and there's a lot more maintenance involved in those. But, it's a proven mechanical system for saltwater.
Are the majority of reels out there one or the other type?
I would say that the industry is leaning toward more sealed systems now. If you look at the hatches and the makos and a lot of these Nautilus, more popular saltwater reels, they're all going to be using a seal drag system. Really, if you look back in the day, like the old M series from Bauer, older Abels, Tibors, even Tibor has seal drag systems, but they have open drag systems.
They do. Okay, that makes sense. Well, we're not going to go deep into everything reels today because I want to keep and talk fishing too as well here. But I'm loving this because the other company too we could just touch on here briefly is Winston. Which is maybe you know what I mean. If you say some of the biggest names out there, I mean it's definitely one of them. Do you also know a little bit of the history of Winston? I think it's been out there a while, right?
It has been. Yeah, we're coming up on 100 here pretty soon.
Oh wow.
The company is. I don't know how. I'm not as dialed on the Winston history side of
Yeah.
things.
Okay. Gotcha.
So don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details on that one and say something wrong or incorrect. But yeah, super long history.
We'll find another guest to follow up on the history of Winston. We'll check in with you on that. But no, but it is obviously a great company, right? I mean, they have, I guess Winston. So what are they most known for? Do you think? What is the Winston? I mean, they're known for a lot. I think obviously quality and all that. But yeah, is there one thing that really people think of Winston about?
Yeah, I think if you ask that question to people in a fly shop, they would probably say the Winston feel is what would come out, which is kind of an arbitrary, hard thing to wrap your head around. But I would say the best way I could describe the Winston feel is it's a lineage of rod builders who take great pride in producing fine fly rods. And you can talk action when you talk about the Winston feel. I'm sure Winstons are known for loading deeper and having maybe a little bit more sweet action, a little bit slower action. But I think when you cast a Winston fly rod, you're feeling 90 plus years of pride and attention to detail that has been carried through from rod builder to rod builder all the way from the days of San Francisco to the days in Twin Bridges. And so when someone says Winston feel, I think that's what they're talking about.
Experience the waters of Bristol Bay at Togiak River Lodge, where fly fishing meets Alaska's rugged beauty. This is the place to complete the Alaska Grand Slam with all 5 salmon species, rainbow trout, Arctic char, and more, where each day offers a new Alaskan adventure. You can visit TogiakLodge.com right now to start planning your Bristol Bay experience with Togiak River Lodge. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. And one thing we've talked a lot about is, the feel, especially with some of the casting instructors we've had on that have talked about that. Just like you said, I think that full action rod, right, where you're feeling the bend into the handle can be very helpful, especially for people that are new to, casting, right? So they can get a feel for the actual line. So I think that's really something that we've talked about a lot. But so, Winston, shout out. Obviously, we will talk a little more about them today as well. But also, let's just throw the other company that you're working for now, Simms. So, obviously, a huge company that's doing great things. There's been some big stories about them recently. But maybe talk about that. How was that for you, the transition over? Was that just an easy transition to make there?
It's still pretty fresh. I've only been there for a little over a month now.
Oh wow!
So yeah, this whole big transition between Winston and Bauer over to Simms kind of recently went down. But man, loving it over there. Great group of people. Take a lot of pride in the products they produce. I'm a little less involved with product development over in that building. A lot more on the data management supply chain side. But loving it, man. It's been great.
And so data, without getting too nerdy about it, data management supply chain, what is that? What does that entail? Well, I guess you're only a month in, so it's probably going to change right as you go. But it sounds like you're going to be more inside. Is that the idea, but not as much using of the gear, or how does that look?
Yeah. So definitely a little bit less outward facing at this new position. It's just to keep it high level, but basically when you go out as a consumer and place an order through whatever channel you decide, right? So that might be D2C, go to a special, to go to a fly shop and buy it, or go to, a big box store like Bass Pro and buy it, right? We take all that data from all the consumers that are purchasing in different areas, and you roll that into a forecast. And then my job is to kind of understand that forecast, build buy plans off of it, and make sure that the product continues to show up on time. So when you go and decide to buy your next pair of G4Z waders, Dave, that they show up on your front door or at the fly shop that you go to try them on at, and they have all the sizes and such that they need.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, and I can imagine as Sims has grown into one of the largest. I mean, not just fly fishing, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going that must be quite a position to keep track of all that, right? And is Sims shipping all over the world now? Is that kind of, you're probably new to it, so you're probably learning about that, but is that the case?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, we ship all over the world. So international business is a good segment of our business for us. And primarily we do most of our business over here in, North America, but a ton of business is done overseas as well.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll leave some of the gear talk. Maybe we'll hit on that as we go. But I want to touch base a little bit on where you're at and some of the rivers that you're fishing, because we're going to be doing some cool stuff. We have the big hole. Well, that's something that's come up recently, in the last couple of years, just with changes in the populations over there, right? And so we're going to have the Big Hole Foundation on to talk more about that. But let's hear about, what is your home waters? Like, what are you fishing, and where were you guiding? Was that Colorado, and now are you kind of more hitting the Montana area?
Yeah, yeah. So I was guiding in Southwest Colorado. So primarily on the Freestone rivers around Telluride area, which would be San Miguel, Dolores, and those two drainages. There's a bunch of creeks over there that feed those two systems, and it's a really fun place to go if you enjoy high elevation dry fly fishing. Pretty great destination. So I spent some time there and then spent a lot of time on the Gunnison as well. So lower Gunnison, which would be the Gunnison Gorge Wilderness area, and then even the section below that that flows from Pleasure Park down into Delta area.
Were you guiding? Were you guiding on the Gunnison?
I was, yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's another one of those rivers that's probably as big of a name as the Big Hole or the Beaverhead, right? Is there a big difference between the Gunnison and some of those other Montana streams where you're at now?
Yeah, the Gunnison's a pretty unique river, man. It holds a special place in my heart. I think it's one of them premier dry fly fisheries that doesn't get talked about as much as other places around the country. Kind of enjoy keeping it that way a little bit, but it's a great place to go experience, and it's remote enough in that part of Southwest Colorado where I feel like the pressure has been, rather stable on it over the last several years rather than, we've seen a big bump in angling pressure in Montana, even in my time up here from when I started college until now. So it's cool to kind of have those places that have, stayed a little more consistent.
Yeah, and is that because the Gunnison is basically hard to, right? There's some canyon sections getting into it. Is that thing? Maybe talk about that. Is that why it hasn't had the pressure so far?
Yeah, definitely in the gorge in the wilderness area. Logistics to go float that are pretty intensive. Getting rafts down into that section is a trip, and it's you have to drive them in on a dirt road that is, you have to have 4x4 capabilities to get in there. And then from there, there's about a mile and a half walk down to the river itself that you hike down with clients when you're guiding it, but all the gear gets mule packed in the night before. So they'll bring all the gear in on trailers, and then load it up on mules, gets packed down and in, and then you walk down with your clients the next day and set the boats up and start a 3-day journey down class 3 and class 4 whitewater in a canyon. It's
Wow.
pretty awesome.
Wow, this is really cool. So, and this was the area that when you were guiding, were you doing a mix of areas, or were you specifically focusing on this area that you're talking about here? It's hard to get into.
For the month of June, I was pretty focused on this area. After June, I would, July and August, I would kind of move more of my efforts toward either the lower Gunnison or back up toward Telluride. But in June, it's a pretty spectacular place. That's when the salmonfly hatch typically happens. And if you're lucky enough to be in there when that hatch is happening, it's a pretty insane place.
Wow. And that's why the June, right? So you've got the salmonfly hatches going strong in that June period.
Yeah, yeah. All of your stoneflies kind of start going that time of the year. So it'll kick off with salmon flies and then kind of move into golden stones and Sally fishing, which is equally as good or if not better, more consistent. And so you get a pretty good 3-week window there where the fish are coming out of their spring behavior, early spring behavior, and starting to move up shallower and want to eat the big bugs. And the water's warming up and they're getting really happy. It's funny. There's like a week lull after the stoneflies really go, where those fish are so full from just gorging themselves on nymphs and adults for weeks now that the fishing actually kind of slows down. And then it picks back up, I would say like mid-July, but it's pretty spectacular when
Wow.
it's full on in there.
When it's gone. I'm interested in this canyon section that you're talking about. I want to kind of hit on this a little more. Where would somebody go if they're listening now and they're thinking, man, this is something I'd love to get into? Is there a person, a shop, place you would direct them?
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a few operations down there. I worked for Gunnison River expeditions in my time down there. So you can always reach out to them. They're kind of the main operation out of Pleasure Park, and Al DeGrange owns that. Al's a great dude. He's been down there for forever. And they're also one of the few operations that holds jet boat permits, which allow you to drive up to the mouth of the canyon and float what we would kind of call it's like the last day of the gorge float most of the time. But if you want to get into going down the river on a trip, I would reach out to Gunnison River Expeditions or Black Canyon Anglers. They would be the two I'd recommend, and it's a pretty awesome trip, man. I think there's only 4 or 5 operations that hold permits to do that, and your days are pretty limited in how many permits are allocated per outfitter. So BCA and GRE have the most of everybody. So your day options are a little bit more expansive with those two.
Gotcha. And is there a chance could you do this if you had the skills for the whitewater, do this on your own, get a permit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So actually as a DIY angler, it's not permitted. You have to go sign in and get campsites, but
Oh, cool. So anybody can go.
totally. Yeah. And if you're willing to huck your gear down there or pay for a mule pack, it's definitely worth it. It's a pretty awesome DIY trip as well.
And where is that? So I'm looking at the Black Canyon. And is it a national park? Is that a national park in there too?
I believe so. Yes.
Right, right. So okay, so this area that you're talking about where you're packing in, that's what would be the tip off point. Where would you go in? What's the area called? The Gunnison Gorge Wilderness?
Yeah, so you go in Chucker Trail, which is going to be the first access when it moves from Black Canyon National Park, I think, into the Gunnison Gorge Wilderness area. And so you use that trail. That's your put in. That's kind of as high up as really you can drop a rubber boat in. People will kayak that Black Canyon area up above, but that's like world class kayaking. Once you get down to Chucker, the river opens up a little bit more through that zone, and then you're able to get a full size rubber boat down it.
Full size. Okay, and then it's a 3-day trip. Is that just because it's a certain amount of miles, or could you stay longer in there?
It's really not that long of a float. It's only, I believe, 14 miles from Chucker down to Pleasure Park. It's just, I think to fully kind of, it's hard to even grasp what you're floating through in 3 days, but really to immerse yourself in it and experience it, definitely doing the 2 nights in there that you're allotted is worth it.
Oh, is it too light? Do you have a max stay you can get in there?
I believe so. Yeah. So I think 2 nights is the most you can really stay in there. I wouldn't quote me on that 100%,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that
sure.
seems like the right information
We'll
to
do
say.
some research. Yeah, this is good. Okay, so this is awesome. Yeah, I'm looking at some photos of it now. It looks spectacular. It's kind of a mix of mountainous canyons with, and you can see it's kind of desert, arid, right, sort of thing. But it's cool. Okay, so we got another bucket list. I mean, I've heard about the Gunnison for years, never fished it, but this is why it's one of those names. Is that this is kind of cool, and it's coming out of a national park, right? So it's totally protected. So the fishing, so the dry fly action, is this your typical fishing wise? How is it different, say, from other streams, either in Colorado or maybe where you're at now?
Yeah, definitely. It depends on flows. Lower water years, I've done that river at 300 CFS and I've done it at a couple thousand. And it changes a lot At 300, those fish spread out a lot more. They're going to be kind of bank to bank. There's a lot of mid-river structure that they can hold on. And that's a fun game to play. I would say the fishing's a little less consistent when the water's lower, especially during big bug season, just because you don't have that like single shot that you're just hitting the whole day. When that river bumps up to 1,000 to 2,000 CFS, everything gets a little bit more sporty, but those fish are kind of forced up on the canyon walls, and that's really where the big bug fishing shines. We'll actually, as you're rowing down with clients, you'll be looking at the walls and you'll be looking for splash marks on the walls, because when those fish eat a salmon fly or a golden stone, they splash water up on the walls, and you're like, oh, that's where one's sitting. So,
Wow.
instruct your clients to get the flies up on that wall, and it's wild how well that works, man.
No kidding. So you literally just whack the wall with your fly, cast it into the wall.
Yeah, it's just bounce it off the wall, let it hit the water,
Man, that's
and
so
let it
awesome.
ride as close to the wall as possible. It's pretty spectacular.
That is cool. Yeah, this sounds like the ultimate kind of guide trip too, because you're not worried about snagging your fly necessarily on a branch right against the bank. It sounds like is it all canyon, or does it change throughout the area throughout this run, this 14 miles?
It changes, it ebbs and flows. I would say the most notable change kind of happens. There's an upper section that is pretty canyonous that you would fish typically first half of the first day or the first day. And then you drop into Ute Park, which is going to be your kind of middle section of the river. That opens up in Ute Park, and it would be maybe a little bit, I would compare that a little bit more to like standard Western fishing. A lot of those casts remind me a lot of fishing the big hole. You're going to have not necessarily willows, but just brush overhanging the banks, mid-river rocks that those fish will hold on. And the variety kind of increases there, I would say. Not to say that there's not walls in that area as well, but it's just not as walled in and tight. And then when you get below that, you really get into the rapids, the notable ones. And that's where you have Cable and a couple of the bigger rapids in that section that are, even I got nervous every single time going through there.
Oh,
You can
really?
do it as many times as possible, and you always get a little nervous.
What's Cable like? Describe Cable a little bit. Is this one where you're, class 4, 3, 4, and you're going into like a big hole, or just super technical? What does it look like?
Most of the rapids in the gorge are a little more technical than they are just big. It's not like these gigantic, massive holes that just engulf boats and
Yeah.
they
It's not
disappear
like
in
the
the
Colorado.
levels. Yeah, totally. It's a little bit different than that. So a lot more piecing your way through rocks, a lot of 2-3 move rapids. But Cable's this class 4. You're kind of in the middle of the gorge at this point. So if you can think, 500, 800-foot plus walls on either side of you, and you're just sitting in the middle of it in a 13-foot raft going through. You kind of start off on the right-hand side.
That's it. Tight.
Yeah, it's tight in there, and there's a lot of big boulders. So a lot of these rapids would happen when it rains really hard in there, and then the rocks and the bank on the side slide down the canyon and into the river. And so that's kind of how a lot of these guys form. And so Cable's an interesting one. You set up on the right-hand side, and you're kind of in this slick up against this big wall that actually fishes great.
Are you fishing? Are you making a few casts before you drop in?
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
You're
Yeah,
fishing like 1X or OX
right.
just straight to your fly. So I don't know. We've definitely had a few that you kind of go into the drop on that rapid, and usually they don't
Right.
come out the other side with you, but it's
No.
always fun to try.
Yeah, that's it. Wow. So you're dropping in. So basically, you come in, it's tight. You drop in, and I'm looking at some videos now of it. This is the cool thing, is that we'll get some links in the show notes so we can take a look. And I'm going to be probably watching these for the next few days, because I love look at the whitewater video. Right. Have you ever been in there? A little bit like almost dumping, or have you been upside down ever?
I haven't ever flipped a raft in there, knock on wood, but it definitely can get spicy.
Have you other places?
I have, yeah. We like to take after work laps on the Gallatin when it gets pretty big up here, which is right in the Bozeman area. And so there's some fun holes that we'll play around with, and it's a little bit less consequence than flipping a raft in the gorge, but it's fun. Carnage is always a good time.
Yeah, I got addicted to these videos of we were doing a series on drift boats, and we were covering the Grand Canyon, like the Colorado, and these
Oh, cool.
wooden dories, right? These drift boats, these wood drift boats, they take them down. That's the boat on the Colorado, And they're amazing because they're decked over, so you can flip them. So these guys would go through these giant waves, and they'd flip their boat upside down. Guys would be swimming, and then it'd take them 2 minutes, and then they'd flip the thing back upright and keep rolling. Right,
Yeah, it's
unbelievable stuff.
so cool, man. Those wooden doors are amazing boats. I'm kind of a drift boat nerd,
Oh,
and
you are?
those
Oh,
things
cool.
are, I love boats, dude.
Nice.
The boat I've been rocking the last few years is a Roe DeVille. I've definitely settled in on that being one of my favorites, but
Yeah, which one was that again?
it's a Roe DeVille. So they're made here in Bozeman, company called Roe, or RO
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the
row.
logo. Yeah. Yeah, Robert and Jane make a great boat over here, man. They have a pretty cool little company going.
On DeMark Lodge offers a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Their family-owned and operated Missouri River Lodge offers comfortable accommodations, delicious home-cooked meals, and personalized service that make you feel like family. Days on the water are capped off by appetizers, beverages, dinner, and stories on the back deck and around the campfire. Book your stay for an unforgettable fly fishing adventure where memories are made and the fish stories are real. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/ondemark. That's ONDEMARK on DeMark right now to book your magical Missouri River trip. I've never rowed a row, but definitely we've seen them out there and stuff. There's a bunch of great. It's kind of cool. The drift boat scene is cool because it's it's been evolving, right? You got boats specifically for Montana, right, in the low side, and then you got all these different in between the skiffs, and it's kind of cool. I'm more, the Western style with the big higher side, getting ready for whitewater. But have you ever seen that in the Gunnison? Are guys able to slide hard boats down there in any place and go through that section?
You can run a hard boat on the lower Gunnison, so the section going from Pleasure Park down, and then a pretty crazy scene that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of a couple times is since GRE has jet boat permits, we'll actually slide drift boats onto the front deck of a 16 or 18-foot jet and run the boat upstream about 3 miles to the mouth of the canyon, and you can drop it off the jet boat, and then that's an awesome like 3/4 day trip to do from there down.
Oh, cool. With some whitewater?
There's some like little stuff in there, but nothing of considerable nature. But that's kind of the cool part about the gorge is that you have to do it in a raft. You have to break that raft down in order to go float that. It's not very accessible for a hard boat. I will say over beers a few nights and campfires, we have talked about we have at GRE, they have like a little 2-man hide skiff that is a little fiberglass like sneaker drift boat, and we have talked about putting that on a game cart and hiking it down in there, but I think that would be pretty highly frowned upon / pretty dangerous, but it'd be
That's all
fun.
like a 10-foot drift boat or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they have these boats. I can't remember what they call them on the Grand Canyon, but again, crazy stuff. But they're like they're basically mini dories, and I think they're like 9 or 10 feet, or maybe they're even 8. They're crazy. They're 1-man drift boats, and these guys are going down through the giant Colorado in them. So that would be one that I would bet you could get down there, slide that thing in there.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. I would be really intrigued to see how that boat would be able to get through some of the tight spots in there, but it'd be fun. I'm all for. I don't know if you've been perusing the YouTubes for whitewater videos. There's a pretty epic video of 2 guys taken, and I think it's like an old high side or something down Bear Trap Canyon over here in Southwest Montana, which there's a rapid in there called the Kitchen Sink that is gigantic, and it's a pretty epic video, man.
Really? Okay, well, we'll look that one up too. Yeah, the Kitchen Sink, awesome. Class 4, I see it. Good. Upper Madison, so that's on the Upper Madison.
Yeah, it's through. So there's the famous section of the Madison that goes from the slide where Kelly's place is down to Ennis, and then that flows into Ennis Lake. And then that section below Ennis Lake where it comes out of the dam, it's in there in the canyon, and it's rowdy in there, man.
It's awesome. I'm going to be spending my day watching videos of whitewater. This is great. Cool. Yeah, I love the talk too, man. I love the drift boats, the raft. I mean, it's all good, right? I think that's kind of the cool thing about all this. Can people also go down into this Gunnison section and just like do a hiking? Is there a trail where they can just backpack this 14-mile section?
Yeah, there's quite a few trails that access down below Chucker and a couple above. There's a couple that you need permits for in the National national park area, I believe. And I don't think I might be misspeaking on saying national park, but down below in the wilderness area, there's I think 8 or 9 different trails that you can take in to different sections of the river. You can also just walk upstream from Pleasure Park, and the way to access fishing in there can be pretty awesome. That's definitely, I would say, friendlier on years where the snowpack's lower and the flows are a little lower. So almost inverse of the boat fishing. Boat fishing, I would really say you're shooting for that like 2001 to 2000 zone. Wade fishing, that 300 zone is really awesome because you can swim across the river and access stuff that's pretty remote.
Right. Yeah, because we're talking the best times in here. Is it fishing wise? What would you say? What is that window to fish this river? Is it open year round?
I would really say June through end of August is going to be kind of prime time in there. There's a lot of variables that go into that, but in general, June, July are probably going to be your hottest months and best months of fishing. August, depending on if monsoon season rolls in hard and strong or not, can be kind of touch and go. And then the fall is actually a great time to be there as well.
In the fall. Okay. Yeah, this is cool. And the Gunnison, yeah, so we're talking about this section here, but are there also some sections that are not the canyon section? Have you fished any of those where you can actually drive to, or they're more accessible?
Yeah, there's the upper portion of the Gunnison River above Blue Mesa Reservoir. I don't have as much experience fishing up there. I've only done a handful of days, but I would compare that to kind of like fishing the upper Snake versus the main stem of the Snake. Not that the rivers are the same size at all, but they kind of play similarly. So I don't have as much experience up there, but the lower section down below Pleasure Park is very accessible by drift boat, and I love that section. The terrestrial fishing down there can be amazing. You're truly in the desert, so it's a pretty unique environment to be catching trout in. You're looking at days where you're getting blasted by sun the entire day and it's 100+ degrees outside, and it's not really what you think of when you think western style trout fishing, but it's a very cool environment.
Yeah, that is. That's a cool. I think the desert part of the piece is awesome about the West. You get these areas that are, forests and stuff like that, but then, yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of desert, right? Is that what this area is? Is that what, when you think of southwestern Colorado, is that kind of what it is as it goes down south, I guess, into the other states?
Yeah, it's lower elevation is very deserty around there. So Montrose area, it's in a transition phase from your higher elevation, more mountainous, typical what you would think of Colorado when you think like Rocky Mountains and high elevation, super green, pretty ultra clear cutthroat stream. That's really what Telluride, Ouray, Ridgeway area is. And then as you start moving down the mountains and getting into lower elevation, it does turn into desert.
Perfect. Cool. Nice. Well, we're going to start to take it out of here. We've got a segment, kind of our gear shout out segment here we're going to get into. And this is great because I think I always love talking gear. We talked boats a little bit and maybe we'll go into that. But today this is presented by Pescador on the Fly. They have this rod that's a 6-piece. They've got a few different rods, but they have this rod that's a 6-piece fly rod versus, say, the 4-piece. So it packs down. Essentially, you could throw it in your backpack, just on your bag. And I've been hearing this. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but I heard in Canada, like some of the flights in there, they're not allowing you to check, or they're not allowing you to bring on your like 4-piece anymore. For some,
Oh, interesting.
they're making you check it. So I'm not sure if that trend is going to continue in other areas. But the cool thing about this is 6-piece, it actually fits inside your backpack, so you don't have to worry about that. But so shout out to Pescador first on that. They got a great rod. But I want to talk Sims here a little bit. You're brand new to it. Were you a Sims person before? Do you know all the gear lineup, or is this something where you're kind of learning about it?
Oh, I've been rocking Sims waders for a long time now. So big fan of what they've been doing over there since kind of the beginning of my fly fishing.
What do you think it is about Sims that put them where they are?
Man, I would say Sims is the original wader maker. They've been doing it here in Bozeman for a long time, and they have a lot of knowledge through trial and error over the years. It gets instilled into every single pair of waders, and so I would say that's really what makes a pair of Sims waders a pair of Sims waders.
Yeah, I think it's and I agree. I think that they've been doing it a while. I think that they make a super durable weight. I always go to like the boots, not wading boots, but just hiking boots. You know, it's like how long should you expect a pair of hiking boots to last? And I always
Hmm.
go back to the 10-year thing. I say, you know what? If I get 10 years out of a pair of hiking boots, that's pretty good. You know, I feel pretty good. Like I got my money's worth. Sims waders, man. I mean, I've had waders that have just been abused and beat up and drugged through, like, and they still don't leak. You know what I mean? I feel like they've mastered that somehow. The durability. Do you find that it's a big part of it? That obviously it depends on your use, but the durability is a big part of what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of goes back to them making them for so long. They've the amount of materials that they've explored over the years and the the way in which the seams get taped on the boot feet and also on the waders, just that whole recipe for how you make a durable set of or a durable wader definitely has been perfected over the years. So
Yeah, it's awesome. Are you more I'm not sure what you call the difference. Are you the zipper, the front zipper, the newer style, or do you like more of the normal, the old style waders where they come up to your chest?
oh, dude, I'm full on zipper gang. If it allows you to use the restroom when you got like 8 layers of clothes on here in the Montana winter,
Oh, right.
I'm all about it.
Yeah, that's why it's so good. Is that yeah? When you're in an environment where it's warm, it doesn't really matter as much. But yeah, when you've got like 4 layers on, you got to take 4 layers off every time. And if you like drinking some beverages, then that's a hassle, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, it's pretty nice to have that zip and
Yeah,
be able to yeah, quick and
yeah,
easy access.
that's it. Okay, well, a couple more on the gear stuff. So going back to reels, because I think this is really interesting with the reels. We talked about kind of some of the reels. You mentioned the SLT, which kind of is winning some awards there. But what do you think is a kind of a common myth anglers have about just fly reels in general? Is there anything that in your time there you heard a lot of that was just kind of a myth that wasn't really true about reels in general?
Man, I don't know if necessarily like a myth, but I would say one thing that when you're factoring in a purchase of a new fly reel, especially if you're going to make the jump and go from, that maybe $100 to $200 price point up to something in the $400 to $500 range and really spend some money on a fly that you should consider as an angler. And this is where I would say, please go into your local fly shop and give them your business. Like those guys are what makes this industry so special. And so giving them business and letting them kind of shed the light and their local knowledge and expertise on what you should be buying is great. But taking the balance of that fly reel in proportion to the fly route into consideration when you're purchasing it is big in a trout setting and a saltwater setting. And you can get as nerdy or as not nerdy about that as you want.
Right.
But
That's a
I
great
think that's
point.
a pretty important factor just to the end user experience.
Yep. That is a great reminder why you should go in and check them out because yeah, the weight and especially depending, right? If you've got a spay rod, we've talked a lot about that. But yeah, just really any rod, right? It's got a balance. Otherwise, what happens if you have a reel that's either too heavy or too light? What does that do to you as the angler?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So a reel that's too heavy is going to lift the tip of that rod up, right? So if you put that rod kind of in your hand in a neutral position where the cork's laying in your hand and just relax your hand, a heavier reel is going to take the tip of that rod and move it upwards. And a really light reel is going to allow the tip of that rod to move downwards, right? And so if you think about that from a fishing perspective, I would say there's definitely some applications where you want a heavier fly reel. I prefer a heavier fly reel in a saltwater setting. I've heard a lot of guys that Euro nymph say that they like a heavier reel, right? Because it's going to lift the tip of that rod. Kind of reasoning behind why I like a heavier reel in saltwater settings is you're not taking many casts, so it's not like you're swinging that system around all day long. A lot more point shoot. So when you're on the front of that flat skiff and sitting there all day and waiting for, your one shot at a permit or your maybe like 10 to 30 shots at redfish for the day, having the tip of that rod angled up and being able to relax your hand and not have to worry about that line dripping down in front of the polling skiff is pretty key, I think, for just for not fatiguing your hand and your wrist and your arm throughout the day of holding that product. So that might be a scenario in which you want a heavier reel going into more of a trout setting, that's where having a reel that's properly balanced, where, you know, you put your hand on that cork or your finger at the front of that cork and that rod lays completely level. And the idea behind that is again reduces fatigue on your arm and your hand while you're casting repetitively all day long like you do in a trout scenario. And so that's kind of the methodology behind how you do that.
That makes sense. And where do you put your finger? You hold the cork near the top. Where do you put to feel if it's balanced right for, say, a trout rod?
Yeah, so if you're taking, let's just take a cigar grip for just to kind of like help envision this, but if you put your finger at the edge of the cork on the cigar grip, kind of in between where the hook keeper, that gap between the hook keeper and the edge of the cork, put your finger right on the edge of the cork in that zone. And that's kind of usually where I like to see a good balance point.
Gotcha. So right up front. So you want your finger right on the tip of that cork, right at the top end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And then if you want it balanced, then yeah, it should sit kind of horizontal, balanced just right. That's kind of what you're looking for with a trout rod.
Yeah, it's typically, and that'll just give you a really good feel in hand, a little bit lighter system overall, and like I said, kind of reduce that hand fatigue while you're casting all day.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, that's an awesome tip. I think that's always something that not everybody thinks about. You know what I mean? That's definitely a good one. So cool. Anything else you wanted to give a shout out on, what we talked about here with, kind of going back just to Bauer, Winston? Feels like we kind of touched the surface. Like I said, we'll put some links to show notes, but anything we missed there before we kind of get a couple more tips and take it out of here?
No, man. Appreciate the time on the podcast this morning. It's been great talking with you. The only thing I'd reiterate is just go see your local fly shops, buy flies, buy fly reels, buy fly rods. Those guys, I think we had an awesome couple of years during COVID where the industry kind of blew up and was doing super good, but those guys still need your business. So go in there and take care of them and show your support.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's always a good reminder is on the shops. That's super important. Well, I got a couple of random ones before we get out of here. You mentioned at the start baseball, and I always love hitting on some sports.
Yeah.
That baseball was one of my sports as well. I wasn't as good as I always wanted to be. But what were you? What was your position in baseball?
Yeah, I played shortstop and then I closed a little bit. So that's
Oh,
what
wow.
led to my elbow injury eventually. But
Oh, you're a
like to
closer.
get after pitching a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah.
There you go. And the fact that you were a closer makes me think that you played some upper level. Was this college ball? Were you? I mean, you didn't have closers. It didn't seem like in the leagues that I played back in the day, back in high school and stuff. But yeah, what was that like? How far did you take your career before you got injured?
Yeah, totally. I never made it past high school. That's kind of when I got injured was in high school, but I played a lot of travel ball growing up and then played 2.5 years in high school before I injured my arm. And then it was kind of like get surgery and not get to play any other sports for more than a few years. And you might get your arm back or, let it ride and play football with the boys, which is kind of what I decided to do.
Oh, you did. Yeah, yeah. What was on the pitch as a closer? Did you have one pitch? Was there a pitch that kind of threw your arm out, or what was that? Do you have something kind of a crazy screwball or a curveball or something like that?
I just threw fastballs and curveballs, so it kind of lived by a two-seamer that moved in, a curveball that broke away, and that's kind of where I partied. But yeah, it was probably being young and not taking care of my arm like I should have, and overthrowing it a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Okay. No, this has been great. I think we can leave everything else for maybe the next one we talk more. I want to check back with you maybe once you get some time at Sims and see how all that's going. But no, this has been great. I think the Gunnison has been one that I'm glad we put it on the map here. But maybe before we get out here, just talk about that. Let's say somebody's going to be hitting the Gunnison. Let's just say it's June, summertime here. What are a couple tips you're giving them before they get out? They're planning their trip. They're going in. Maybe they're walking in, or they're doing this big, amazing flow. What are you telling them before to get prepared?
Yeah, this is gonna sound pretty basic, but just make sure you bring a lot of water or bring a way to get water in a really hot environment in there. And I've had a couple days that got a little interesting where I ran out of water on the hike out. So always keep that in mind and just know that you're in a desert environment. The fishing itself is pretty self-explanatory. So
Is it pretty easy? Is the fishing once you get in there, is it pretty easy?
yeah, I mean, it's still trout fishing, right? It has its days, but I would say overall, if you know what you're looking for, you can have a pretty good, successful day in there.
Yeah, good, good. And species wise, give us that before we get out of here. What was the species in that river?
Yeah, so it'll be rainbows and brown trout, and the Gunnison rainbow is pretty unique. It's its own strain of fish.
Oh, it is. It's a native fish in there.
Yeah, it's wild, but it's resistant to whirling disease, which kind of plagued that river. I don't have a time frame off my head. But they had a pretty bad episode of whirling disease in there, and then some of the fish that were already in the system became resistant to it, and that's that current population is primarily that strain of fish, which is really cool. But the gunny bow is shorter but really thick, big shoulder stacked fish that's powerful and it's used to swimming in pretty turbulent water, so they're cool fish.
There you go, the gunny bow. Okay. Nice. All right, John. Well, yeah, like we said, we'll talk more maybe on the next one, some big hole. We'll get into some of these other rivers after you have some time to kick it in Montana. Have you been there a while now? Like in the Montana, you've been there. How many years now have you been living in that area?
I'm going on year 7 up here, actually. So
it's a good chunk of time.
I love it, man. I don't think I'll ever leave. It's definitely home now.
That's it, Montana. Awesome, man. Well, we'll be in touch. Thanks for all your time today, and we'll send everybody out to some of the links that we talked about, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome, Dave. Well, appreciate you having me on this morning, man, and you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Since John has no social media accounts, he has no website, he is a very hard man to track down. We don't have a link for John right now, and to be honest, I'm not sure how we connected with him, but we did. If you can, check in with maybe Sims, Bauer, or Winston. Let him know about this episode. Let him know you heard him on this podcast, and if you see him out there, check in and say hi. As always, follow the show if you want to get that next episode into your inbox. We've got some big ones coming up here. We are getting ready to launch into the Missouri trip. Missouri River, we've been talking a little bit about this. 3 other famous Montana rivers come together, forming the Missouri, the Big Mo, and we're going to be fishing it this year. It's got more fish per mile, a large number of fish per mile than you hear in most places, and a lot of big fish. We're talking average 18 inches for these fish. So stay tuned for that. We're going to dig deep into that episode in a couple weeks here as we prepare for that. And just want you to have a great afternoon, a great evening, or a fantastic morning, wherever you are in the world. And I appreciate you for stopping in and checking in with us today.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.